Welcome to an online content module for the 6th grade Georgia Standards of Excellence in Social Studies. The Georgia Standards of Excellence will often be referred to as the GSE throughout this module. Today we'll be exploring what students need to understand about how the era of European colonialism influenced the development of the Americas. Your students have an understanding of the topic of African slavery in the U.S. from their elementary social studies curriculum. In 3rd grade, students were taught about the history of American slavery in the colonies, and the abolitionist movement and resulting Civil War which ended slavery is learned about in 4th grade. When students reach 6th grade, they will for the first time be exposed to a global perspective on African slavery during the time of the colonial era. This standard asks students to go beyond describing the African slave trade itself, but requires them to consider the many impacts and influences this practice had on Latin America during colonization and on into the present day. Additionally, students will need to understand other influences of colonization by Spain and Portugal, including the languages and religions that remain central features of Latin America today. These history elements are a great time to remind students of the connecting theme of conflict and change, as this historical era is a classic example of the theme. To help students make connection to this theme, you can frame these elements through a cause and effect lens, drawing on students' background knowledge from their 3rd grade study of the Age of Exploration. Some students may need to be reminded of the time period in history when European explorers and settlers came to the Americas to claim and settle the New World. Your instruction will focus not on that time period, but on the results of colonialism in Latin America. While there are multiple influences that you can teach, we will focus here on 4 of the main results that are suggested by your standard. An important note will be helpful here. We know that there were many European nations participating in the exploration and settlement of Latin America. However, due to the pervasive and lasting influences of the Spanish and Portuguese, these are the primary ones you will focus on with your students. It may be difficult for some students to understand the situation for the earliest explorers and settlers who decided to claim for Spain or Portugal the lands we now know as Latin America. In order to keep the land in the hands of Europeans, many people were needed to settle it, procure resources from it, and develop community structures so that the region would be loyal to the Spanish or Portuguese crown. The historical record shows that there were multiple advanced American Indian civilizations present in the Americas at the time of exploration, whom the Europeans tried to engage in assisting with settlement. However, the American Indian population dwindled drastically as a result of disease and conquistadors, conquerors whose superior weaponry was used to kill American Indians who resisted them. Because African slavery was already an established institution in Spain and Portugal, the explorers from these nations brought African slaves with them when they explored and settled in Latin America. Since the need for labor was high, increasing the slave trade to the region was a logical next step. In fact, Latin America was the main destination for African slaves belonging to Portuguese and Spanish colonies. African slaves arrived in the earliest stages of exploration and settlement, including on Columbus's original voyage to the land he named San Salvador. From the 16th to the 19th centuries, over 9 million Africans were brought to the Americas. Of these, less than 500,000 came directly to the U.S. The rest were taken to Latin America and the Caribbean. As can be seen from this table, far greater numbers of African slaves were shipped to Latin America than ever came to the North American colonies. This fact is important for students to grasp in order to process the multiple and lasting effects of African slavery on Latin America. This content is rich with imagery, data, and multiple methods to help students develop a comprehensive understanding of the effects of the African slave trade. This is a screenshot of an interactive tool at SlaveVoyages.org that allows students access to primary source information about the African slave trade. They can use this resource over here in the Animation tab to get a picture of the onset, rise, and decline of the African slave trade to the Americas. They can either watch the brief interactive all the way through so that they can see that pattern, or they can go ahead and use this bar to hone in on a particular year. You'll want them to be able to get an understanding on their own of what you mean by saying that more slaves were brought to Latin America than to the North American colonies, since that will be their background knowledge that you will be working with. Watching this brief interactive will help them to move beyond that elementary school understanding of the African slave trade in the United States to see the major influence the slave trade also had on the development of Central America, the Caribbean islands, and South America. As the presence of Spanish and Portuguese settlements dominated the region, the need for slavery increased in order to make the colonies profitable for their European monarchs. Slaves were forced to work in mines in Mexico and Argentina, on coffee plantations throughout South America, and on sugar plantations in the Caribbean, which required large numbers of laborers to make growing sugarcane profitable. These industries remain important sources of economic activity in Latin America today. Slavery in the Americas gradually came into disfavor among the European settlers and their descendants, beginning around the 1830s. By 1886, the last slaves in Latin America were granted their freedom. An important influence of this era is the ethnic blending that was the result of genetic mixing between three distinct people groups: the Native American Indians, European settlers, and Africans brought to Latin America as part of the slave trade. The result is that the people of Latin America today have a wide range of the physical features of multiple ethnic groups. Because our students may only be familiar with the ethnic groups in their local environments, it is very important to help them understand how each of the people in these pictures could rightly be considered Latino or Hispanic when they originate from countries as diverse as Cuba, Guatemala, Peru, Chile, Mexico, etc., despite how different their physical appearances seem to be. Class differences grew up alongside of ethnic blending in the societies of Latin America. As has often been the case in human history, those who were European or had only European ancestors occupied the highest statuses. However, as can be seen from this series of paintings, having a Spanish father or mother gave you the likelihood of higher social status and economic wealth than having no direct European ancestors. There's a good deal of art available online that students can use to examine the ethnic and class differences that were the result of ethnic blending among the peoples of Latin America. For example, students could examine clothing, houses, and occupations to see the different characteristics of the wealthy class demonstrated by features of these paintings. Be sure to also include contemporary photographs as we have here, not to emphasize class differences, but to help students see the way that ethnic blending has culminated in great diversity among the contemporary peoples of Latin America. Using data integrated with map reading skills is a wonderful way to help students develop a deep understanding of the contributions of European settlers and African slaves to the ethnic diversity in contemporary Latin America. For example, students could use a data chart like the one we showed earlier that noted that 40% of African slaves were brought to the Caribbean islands, to draw conclusions and explain trends for the ethnic composition of Latin America shown on this map as of 2011. Language differences in Latin America are also the result of the era of exploration and colonization. Because most of Latin America was explored and settled by Spanish conquistadors, the language spoken by most people in Latin America today is Spanish. However, there are some notable exceptions. For example, the island of Haiti has French and Haitian Creole as its official languages today, which are vestiges of the lengthy time Haiti spent as a colony of France. Likewise, Brazil, the largest country in South America, has Portuguese as its official language since it was claimed and settled by explorers sailing under the Portuguese flag. Although Haiti is not included in this GSE history standard, it can be used as an instructional example of the ways in which European languages came to dominate particular areas of Latin America. For assessment purposes, students must be able to describe how Portuguese and Spanish became the dominant languages of Latin America and where these languages are used in contemporary times. Because the Spanish and Portuguese were both adherents of the Roman Catholic faith, this remains the prominent religion throughout all of Latin America. Indeed, the Pew Research Institute estimates that upwards of 90% of the people living in Latin America at the turn of the 20th century were members of the Catholic faith. Recent data suggests that about 69% of those currently living in Latin America remain Catholic. Students need to have an understanding of this dynamic and must be able to describe the Spanish and Portuguese influences that can yet be seen today in the religions of Latin America. It would be really simple for you to just tell students this relationship as part of a lecture, but they will not have a grasp of the importance of conflict and change over long periods of time unless they are able to discover relationships like these for themselves. Using a simple map, such as this one found on Wikimedia Commons, students could use the color keys to estimate the percentage of people in Latin America who are Catholic, estimate the percentage of people in Portugal and Spain who are Catholic, compare these two figures, and then make some conjectures about the possible reasons for their observation. Using information about the settlement of Latin America, they will be able to test their conjectures to see how valid their ideas were. Inquiry activities such as this make social studies learning engaging for students, and it allows them to practice the skills used by historians and geographers in real-world contexts. When you deconstruct these standards to see what students are really supposed to be doing with this content knowledge, it becomes clear that the students, rather than the teacher, need to do most of the talking, the explaining, and describing. Using instructional methods to support inquiry will help your students by giving them the opportunity to talk about, write about, and develop visual representations to share their understandings of these topics. For more information on how to include inquiry as a regular part of your instruction, be sure to view some of the pedagogy videos for your grade level. We hope that you have enjoyed this presentation and the information that it contains will support you in providing excellent instruction in the 6th grade Georgia Standards of Excellence in Social Studies.